Welcome to Big 20, a roundtable discussion where GMs from all walks of life discuss gaming and field questions from viewers. Hosts this week are
Pete Petrucia. I make games with Imagining Games, sell books and other tabletop items for the Indie Game Developer Network, and write GM advice for Gnome Stew.
I'm Callie. I'm the DM of Riff and Rabble. We stream on Twitch. We're running Storm King's Thunder. That's about it for me. Oh. Still muted.
Sorry about that. I'm Cheyenne. I'm the DM for Chicks with Crits Season 1, and hopefully onwards. And that's pretty much what I do.
So this week we are talking about GM prep. When is it enough? Let's start with Pete.
So, a lot of GMs come to the topic of prep from totally different angles. Some obviously over prep for a long period of time, while some under prep. And that can really vary over time as you try to find out what your equilibrium is. So I guess the first question would be so Cheyenne or Callie, which one of you wants to throw yourself out there and say you either under prep or over prep?
Over prepped, I think. For sure. When I started writing it, I've based mine off of my world off of different fairy tales. So I just started picking them and writing out for each individual fairy tale. I have, I think, 7 prepared now for them to all go through and and make their way through.
And Callie, how do you?
I would probably also fall on the over prep. I have never done a homebrew campaign. However, this Storm King's Thunder campaign that I'm running is the only one I've done, so it's pre-written. But I imagine now, 2 years into it, it's a lot different than when I started. But before I started the campaign, I actually did a lot of research into how to prep because I had never DM'd before, and I was like, I don't know how to do this. This seems really daunting. And I found actually a few guides that specifically went through how they prepped Storm King's Thunder and how they prep pre-written campaigns in general, and there's a lot of valuable information that I took bits and pieces from. But yeah, the first few sessions were definitely way more content than would have ever gotten through. But again, a lot of the suggestions I found online were for the typical sort of 4-hour session, and we were only doing 2-hour sessions. So I had to kind of get a feel for that and for my players, because my players are very roleplay centric. So there's a lot of times where I'm just sitting there going, oh yeah, okay, all right, back and forth, yep. Okay, I mean, that's time, and we've done almost none of the things that I had prepared.
10%. We got to the
first. And I had to create 15 NPCs that I wasn't expecting to make. So cool. I think that was the most valuable thing I learned, was have an incredibly long list of pre-generated NPCs.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the things I was going to touch on with you, is I was like, well, what did you find out? What did you learn about your research? What worked and what didn't? But, maybe before that, before we unpack all the good stuff, right, let's talk a little bit about where we came from, because I think, Cheyenne, you probably have the same idea, right? When you start, I think most of us over prep, because we're all kind of really afraid of not having enough content and having people stare at us with blank stares.
Yes.
Cheyenne, how much did you over prep when you started?
Oh, I I've kind of had like the basic storyline for like a few years, like, and I was just like, okay, now like I have like a group to like. I didn't know what I wanted the story to be, and D&D came, and I was like, oh, I can tell this story like with my friends through this. So I've kind of known for like a long time, but then getting into the details, I asked them about it like a couple months in advance before we started playing. I'm like, cool, so you guys want to do this with me? And I was like, all right then. So then I just like went from like a few months of like prep, just getting like trying to go from beginning to end. Although I've definitely slowed down a bit with that, trying to focus more on where they are now instead of going hardcore into the future.
Did you have anything in mind of like how far in the future you were? Like, did you ever sit down and go, shit, I think I'm like 24 sessions in and we're on session 3? Like,
Yeah, kind of. I know I know what the end will be, but we're like right in the beginning, right? And like still technically in season 1 they haven't left really like the first like town yet. They've gone through like several things. They need to make a name for themselves, but but yeah, I have it pretty far in advance where I'd like them to go, but now I'm trying my best to break it down into smaller chunks and try not to over prepare those now.
well, especially when you have Callie's issues sometimes, and usually that's good, is that you even prepped 2 hours worth, and then like you only used 10% of what you prepped because the players just did their thing, and that's cool. I think at least that's my opinion. But, Callie, how about you? Like, was it like notebooks full, or was it like did you come to a session and go, here's my 10 pages of notes, or was it like 2 pages, or?
I have a binder.
I don't know how many pages it was. Yeah.
I don't know specifically. I was very nervous because not only was it my first time DMing, we streamed it. So I was like, I need to be prepared. And one of the number one things you find when people discuss DM prep is the players will do things you don't expect. And I was like, well, that's a terrifying thought. So I tried to prepare for as many eventualities as I could consider.
Right. Yeah.
Although it was helpful, this adventure is in the beginning very linear. So for the first, I would say levels 1 to 5, and I imagine this is the case for many 1 to 5 adventures, it's very linear because, I mean, they're very squishy. It's introducing a lot of exposition. It's basically story setup. So in terms of the players doing something I didn't expect, it wasn't like they're going to a continent that I'll have to create on the fly. It was just like, oh, okay, they're going to not go into this building and they're going to negotiate instead of fight. Okay. Suddenly personality. Okay. So in terms of volume of notes, it wasn't crazy, but yeah, the suggestion that I found, the guide that I found, was to read the whole adventure and then break it down and then like throw out the parts that you don't want, whatever, add bits. And I was like, that's a lot. That's a lot for me. It's a little overwhelming. I did sort of get the gist of everything in terms of where the story's trying to lead the players, like the eventuality. But then I just broke it down by chapter, I guess, and then just focused on one at a time. It's become easier since then, and I think the linear nature of the first couple chapters were really helpful for easing me into it, for me feeling comfortable, for the group getting comfortable, for in terms of group dynamic, in terms of game dynamic, how to play the game, how does this work? So I think that was really beneficial.
Cheyenne, did you start with like pre-generated adventures too? Did you do modules at first?
No, actually, I didn't. Okay, I did one pre-adventure. It was it was based off of actual Cannibal Shia LaBeouf. Yeah, someone wrote a quick like one-shot adventure for the song "Actual Cannibal Shia LaBeouf." That's the one time that I did a pre-adventure, but pretty much aside from that, like I've come up with like, my own things, or the games that I've played with my friends have come up with most of the time on their own.
That sounds incredible, by the way.
It was a very fun night.
Well, I was thinking we could talk about some of the shortfalls of not having enough prep, but there's at least one question over there in the chat that I see. So maybe we jump ahead and address a question. Do you run into issues with planning too far? What if they take a hard right on your plans and the players sorry, I was like, this is what he said, Ben. One is totally off key from what you planned. Yeah, especially if you plan X Games. So, I mean, long story short, that person, Dusty's asking about, like shit, if you plan, a whole lot of content and somebody takes a hard right, like the players are like, we're going to negotiate. And that just removes 6 sessions of plot, the plot you created. Like, what do you do? How does that affect you as a GM? This sounds Cheyenne first, but
I had a moment where the group went to go off and help a hunter track down a monster that had killed his father, right? And I ended up splitting the group. 2 went with him to investigate an area that had caught fire a few months ago, while the rest were left at the camp. And it was going to be, well, revealed that the hunter himself was planning to murder them all and pin this horrible forest fire on them. But like he's like, I thought I was doing really good with him slowly starting to slip into insanity, dropping some clues. But my one character immediately knew he was supposed to lead them like back to the camp and kill them there. On the walk back to the camp, my one player, Barakas, is just like, nope, this dude's bad guy. We're gonna kill him now. His back is turned, and like immediately like went to they just killed the big bad right then and there. I'm like, he didn't even like get back to camp for like a fight to happen. I'm like, well, all right then. So I'll just let that happen, and just to find a different thing for them to deal with. So I was able to move a creature that was supposed to join their fight instead over to the camp and go after a different player entirely. Just you got to be able to move like things around if they suddenly like veer off course, and hopefully you can eventually get them back together and like into a working order.
Callie, like if you've had that situation, I mean, obviously for most of us, when we do have that situation, it's a real bummer to our prep, because we're like, hey, I put all this work into this stuff that maybe is thrown out the window, or at best repackaged for some other sort of game later. Have you found that discouraging before, or have you been able to repackage it better?
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank on any specific examples.
Sure, yeah.
But definitely.
I try to forget those moments too.
I don't think it was anything as major as the big bad guy, but yeah, there have been moments where it's like, I've got all this, and then they're like, yeah, we're just not going to do that. It's like, oh, okay. So what I've kind of fallen into is having a general idea of story hooks, characters, whatever, for down the line. It's just sort of like a general goal, I guess, or end finish line. And then I just prep the next session. I'm not prepping more than one session ahead in terms of actual hard notes, content, maps, unless it's for like a final confrontation that like needs to happen, whether it's a fight or just a discussion or whatever, because my players just end up doing things that are like, oh yeah, I guess you could totally do that. Yeah. So I've fallen into that. I just have a general idea for like their backstory stuff, because obviously pre-written campaign, the core story is already written. I don't have to do that.
Yeah.
But because my players like role play, I have incorporated their stories into the game. So yes, I have had many ideas suddenly veered or broken or just totally scrapped, and it's like, yeah, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to put that much work and just not be able to use it, or maybe I can do it down the line. I don't know, but so.
Kind of a dumb question is like for me, I can't remember the last time I've been really upset about prepping too much. I used to prep a lot, and a lot of times I would look at my notes after and be like, I have this really well organized outline that's like I typed it out with like spots so that I'd remember and be easy to refer back to and stuff. Like, maybe NPC personalities and like the key points, the stuff they knew. But it never really bothered me if at the end of the session I looked at my notes and said 10 pages that didn't get used. It really didn't bother me because I was always just more afraid of like not having enough. And that really was my issue for a long period of time, is I always over prepped. Yeah, which is funny, right? Because the truth is I don't have the problem anymore, because now I either have little to no prep, or it's like I use bullet point outlines, like you said, just kind of like I know where I want them to go, some options, what's the problem, where are some key locations, cool people, and then roll in with my players.
Yeah, I don't think I've been upset over losing anything. It usually ends up better the way my players decide to do it, because it's like, oh, wow, I never would have thought of that, but that's really cool. Let's roll with it. And yeah, so I've never been disappointed. More surprised, I think, it's always surprise.
I have a friend of mine is Ben Riggs, and he wrote this thing called like the encounter theory, which is like an approach to like game design, like module adventure design kind of thing. And he said something very interesting, which I think is pretty true. But he was just talking about how like we shouldn't tell them how to solve a problem. And by that, I mean the game master should not have one way for the players to solve a problem. Like you said, it should be should have many options where the players can use their strengths or whatever they think makes sense within reason, right? Because at the same point, you don't want it to be so that they can solve any problem with anything, unless that's the kind of game you're running. Like I made a game that you do that, but there's but I think it's good when it's open, because problem solving is so interesting for the players. It's like one of the keys of fun that they get is they get to look at these people and get in their shoes and go, how do I fix this thing? How do I solve these problems? How do I, deal with this adversity? Cheyenne, what do you think? Like, have you ever been bothered by too much prep? Like, it doesn't sound like you're a person who would care about that, but.
No, not too much. I actually like when they take the reins, or like throw like some of the stuff, just like caution to the wind. Like they're in a magical maze. They gotta like navigate their way through. What do? You grab the gnome and you throw them as hard as you can at the tower in the middle of the thing. I'm like, yeah, okay, there you go. Like that's a way to get over it and whatnot. Or you guys have to make a name for yourself in the city. Well, one character, I'm going to go and I have a magical cook pot. I'll go feed the poor. The other one, I'm going to run a seniors aerobics class in the middle of town, just completely by accident. Yeah, just letting them run wild. Like sometimes I don't mind if they go off with the plans, because it leads to like some great moments.
I feel like
Definitely.
So. At least I was kind of talking about how I think the scariest thing is when you don't have enough prep. So why don't we talk a little bit about that? Like if we've had those situations, because I know there's been times where maybe like Dustin said, they take the hard right. You're like, shit, I didn't have anything planned for if they actually left town, went to the next town over, and went to the, the Coliseum where there was fighting going on. Like I thought maybe that could happen like down the road. I was just mentioning those names and places for foreshadowing. And then they were like, beeline there this session. And I didn't want to, say, all right, pizza, you didn't random encounter trying to stall by the time, you just kind of like, eventually you I don't know, I don't try to overstall. I think stalling is a really bad thing for a GM to do. Your players catch on and you just start to get used to putting things off, forever. Session 1, gets kidnapped. Session 10, we still don't know where she is. Session 25, we still don't know where she is. Eventually we forget why it all started. So I guess, Cheyenne, have you ever had that moment where you found yourself like with no prep, like complete improvisation needed?
Yes, I was playing a one shot with a friend. They were DMing, but they ended up just like handing it over to me. They're like, I just can't. They're like, it was one of the first times I ever done. They're like, I just can't do it. Can you just can you just like take over this? So I'm just sitting there like, well, we're already 20 minutes in, so I'm suddenly that DM like I have nothing planned. All I know is we're pirates, so I'll just completely improvise with this. It ended up with someone suplexing a ghost out of suplexing a ghost out of one of the other characters, just getting completely off the rails. And I just like, okay, how weird and crazy can I make this? Just tried to go off the fly with that.
I'd love to see like that GIF. Like, a ghost.
Oh yeah, just the way they describe it too. It's like there's like this giant dragonborn and this tiny little elf who had been in like prison for like months. It's just like no, collapsed lung and everything, but you did it. You saved your friend.
Kelly, how about you? How do you deal with situations when you're like, shit, it's 30 minutes in, we got, well, in your case, 2 hours to go, and I don't think I can get back to what I was thinking was this session was going to be about.
Well, that's like my worst nightmare. I don't think I've had it that bad.
Sure.
I did actually say to my group when we were starting, like, I'm not a professional DM. This is the first time I'm doing this. I'm not good at improv. When I feel like I'm under pressure, my mind goes blank. So if you could give me as much notice as possible for what you want to do, like if we're going into this session and you guys were thinking of like going into this dungeon, you need to go into this dungeon because that's all I'll have prepped. If you want to go somewhere else, you need to tell me beforehand. My group's been pretty good about that. But yeah, definitely a nightmare feel for me with the anxiety and that, but it's a lot better now with 2 years under my belt. I think there has been a couple moments where it's like, you're doing what? Yes, I have that here. And just flip. And it's like, yes, that person is definitely available and their name is here somewhere. I will find it at break. And so it's never been anything dramatic, like they went to a different town or somebody's like, hey, can you DM for me? Never been that bad. I think I would probably crumble under the pressure.
Yeah, I think you gave a couple really good pieces of advice. I don't know if you know how good they are, but they are really valid. Is that a game master is a player, and it's very important that we sometimes we forget like the pressure and the anxiety and the like the need to like perform well and such, like entertain this group of people can be overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And it's really important to be like, hey, I'm a player too. Like, even if this is a game where like, maybe something like even more technical games like GURPS or something where you really need to be prepped because of stat blocks and NPCs and adversaries. Like, it's okay sometimes to be like, hey guys, like, okay, cool, we're going to do this. And let them know that you can let the veil down sometimes. Like, it's good not to do it all the time. Right, yeah. So that they think they know that you do prep or like you care, you put with it. But like it's valid to be like, what do you think happens there? And especially if you don't do that very often, like it's good to pop those questions in or be like, I wasn't really planning for us to go here, so how about this?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So Jenna Sasquatch is asking or wants to know if how do you prep your like specific NPCs for a session if you know that they're coming? Do you do anything special to prep your NPCs?
Yeah, that's kind of the next part of this conversation, right? Where does it suck when you over prep and it doesn't get used? Is like monsters or bad guys, boss fights, NPCs. Anything that takes you a lot of time to make one little thing that may or may not get used, those are the ones that really eat you up later. Do you two have any tricks to like how you prep NPCs that are like maybe going to be in the story? Or do you prep a couple extra like combat scenes? Because you two mostly run D&D, right? So you kind of have to have the monsters handy. I mean, you got the book. I guess you could flip to the page. But do you have any? What's your go-to of how you grab monsters on the fly?
I don't know that I have.
Sure. So you just you're like, hey, there'd be orcs. I've used them before. I flip to the page. I throw a couple on this piece of paper with some hit point totals.
Well, I also, we play online, so we use Roll20, so everything's like at my fingertips, which is really helpful. I mean, I have the books beside me as well because it doesn't have all of the monsters, but yeah, I usually have a general idea going into the next session of like where they're going and so what they might encounter. Sometimes those encounters don't happen, but so far they've just been like random encounters that don't mean anything. They actually are only like just starting to encounter like story baddies, both like custom baddie, well, not custom monsters, but like custom story monsters, and then also core story monsters, because like I said, they do a lot of roleplay. We're actually not really very far into the story because we've been in one city for like 6 months. But I actually have a list of like 24 NPCs, names, races, appearance, simple stat block, and then a small personality blurb. I don't prep voices because as soon as I am in the game, I have totally forgotten what I was planning to do for them, and it all just ends up sounding the same anyway. So I don't prep voices. It's not important. I think my players can figure out that they're different because I like hold myself a little differently, which is also hard because you can only see my head.
Yeah.
But I haven't really encountered that a whole lot as of yet.
And it sounds like, and specifically with NPCs, you said you like little personality blurbs, just a little bit of a stat block, like minimum.
Yeah, it's just the basic stats. I will make stuff up. I'll just maybe just roll a d20 and see how it works. If it comes to rolls, I'm not too concerned about the numbers. If it seems like they should be strong, they're going to be strong. You know, it mostly depends on how my players roll. Also because I roll consistently poorly and it sometimes doesn't make for great storytelling. So sometimes I just pick a number.
Yeah,
and
that's a great point. I totally want to touch on a little bit later too. Is that like sometimes we follow the dice too far. Like the game mechanics can lead to a worse game. But if you just keep following the game as directed, sometimes you can make the mistake of doing that, you know?
Yeah.
Hey Cheyenne, what about you? Like do you how do you prep your NPCs? Like the ones that are questionable? Like
yeah, I have a sheet that I wrote out of like 20 like NPC like stats, and I'll roll for which one that I want to use.
oh, cool. Yeah.
I have a whole little sheet just in case, and for certain ones, like I'll write like the names beside them because eventually it's like, oh yeah, so I rolled this person, so this will be them if they ever show up, and you know sometimes they share the same stats, but that's all right. It's like leave it up like to random. And as for like enemies, I'm like trying to like figure out like where they are. If they're in a city, like what would they run into? If they're out in the fields, what kind of like wild animal or strange like other creature would be like living in tall grass or just on the outside of like the woods or whatnot, if they're on a farm or stuff like that. And also because I base it off of certain fairy tales as well. Like I'll pick like I did what is it, the girl with no hands. I called that one, was it the farmer's son? So like it's going to be like based right in this like this they're going to be going through this little story on the farm. So what's going to be there? They're going to have to specifically fight like this thing, but what else is there for them to accidentally like mess with? Could they get into a fight with like a farmhand or something? Or is anyone else going to end up there? Yeah.
I was kind of thinking about as you were talking about that with the monsters. You know, one of the hardest things too, because both of you, are you 5e mostly, or
Yes.
Cheyenne? How about you?
5e.
Yeah. So I mean, the one other thing that's kind of weird with having a game with a class structure and like a level structure is that you know, if this character is 5th level, this NPC, right? You're thinking like, oh, cool, they have these abilities. But if they're 2nd, they only have these abilities. So that does kind of throw a little bit of a wrench into at least having an idea of like, you have to add like, what level is this person and what class are they? Unless that doesn't matter. Unless you're like, this is an NPC for information, not for like professional background. Have you found, either of you found that an issue of like, where you're like, oh shit, well, what level is this person? I have to take a second and look this up.
I don't know that I've encountered that on the fly. I have encountered that when trying to build like random encounters or specific instances where it's like, oh right, there's levels and that affects stats and but a lot of like the monsters have that built in, like if they can cast spells or anything like that is usually when that becomes an issue. I haven't done that for general NPCs as of yet. I did start out doing that, like basically building like a full character sheet for NPCs, and I was like, this is way too much work. I don't want to do this.
Right.
Yeah, so I basically just do the base stat block at this point, and it's working so far, but again, we haven't encountered a lot of combat, so that might not work so well in the future, but I figure, you know, what's going to be a challenge? Like, should this be a challenge for them? Like, what is the situation? If they're going up against farmers, they're professional adventurers. They should handle farmers no problem. If they're going up against like city guard, yeah, they might give them some trouble, but typically the people that are going to give them the most trouble are like elite, you know, other adventurers, assassins, people with like specific training, once, you know, they reach the higher levels especially. So the chances of them, well, my group anyways, my group is full of like very nice people, so they're not going around stabbing random people, starting bar fights. So I haven't had to deal with that quite yet, but I would probably just do the stats in my head. Like if I have the base stat block and they want to attack this random person, what is this person's skills? And if they're skilled enough to put up a challenge, it's going to be higher numbers.
So I have a question for you guys. What about prepping for a social either encounter, or you know you're going to have a role play heavy night, and one of your players has anxiety or something that you know that it's not going to be in their wheelhouse? How do you prep for that?
Well, yeah, I mean, in that case, usually so I'm just going to rant on this for a second. Maybe give the other two a second to think. You probably need to support that player in a way by setting them up that they're with other players who can help kind of supplement that character. If you're a GM and you plan for, like, you know, this is the session where we're having the masquerade ball, and so is, you know, incognito is maybe not the best person for the job, but they're the right person for the demographic to be, you know, like dressed up and put in disguise. And they're like, I don't know what I'm doing, guys. Like maybe then you surround that character even with other players who can help boost that player, to help them kind of share that spotlight, because the game forces you to share spotlight when it's someone else's turn to do something, even if it's all about one person. So, I mean, that's one of the core things. Obviously, like to get that player more engaged, you can try things, but they're not, you keep reaching in that GM tool bag and pulling something out, hoping it works, right? Like, is this the right wrench for their job? Like, ask if they're a person that likes playing a certain type of character. You can put them in situations where they get to keep playing that type of a personality, where they're comfortable. Yeah, the two of you. So, like Callie or Cheyenne, anything jump to you of how do you help that anxious person who might be the social spotlight character, the role playing heavy session character, and maybe that's not the right player or the player who jumps at those occasions?
I think it's a good idea to have like that character maybe with another one. So like try to have like two characters like at least together in the social situations like that. And also it might like help to like address them like specifically like but like in character, like to like address them specifically like about what's going on, and like not like in general. It might help them with their anxiety to think through their character more instead of like it's me answering, it's my character answering. So try to answer maybe more in character could definitely help.
Yeah, I think, and maybe I was also thinking this too. Sometimes we kind of poo-poo on players when they're like not in character. They're saying, well, I think my character would do this, or my character would do that, or my character says this. But that might be a time when it's very that it's almost perfect for the player's experience to let them kind of have a little more space between them and their character so that the player is more comfortable, and we as the table can all kind of continue supplement with our imaginations, right? Like, okay, the player's not the person who really wants to say word for word the elegant speeches or something, right? But they can talk about how they're doing it, roll for it, and then the other players can kind of be like, oh, and maybe he said this, and then I say this, and roll with it, right?
Yeah,
that's a great point.
Not every player is going to be comfortable with those moments, period, and that's okay. I think that comes down to like the group discussion, not necessarily just prep. Because I think every group should discuss ahead of it, time, after games, whenever. Discussions should be had regularly about what you want, what you're comfortable with, what do you want to change, yeah, my group has a player who had never played a tabletop RPG before, and that's how she role plays. She does speak as her character on occasion, but does a lot of descriptive speaking. Describes how her character does things, and that's how she role plays. And it's just as evocative as my players who do voices and actions, and it works for them. And I agree. Creating space, creating scenarios for each character, for each player, allows them the chance to figure that out, to try different things, and to figure out what feels comfortable. And as the DM, I guess on the prep side of things, you just kind of have to figure out where that comfort is, what they're going to shine in.
I think sometimes too, you can reach out to the players privately, right? A lot of games have that at least one or two people who's almost like the co-captain, right? Like they're the party leader player, even if they're not in character, the party leader. Some of the players there are always trying to put the spotlight, try to like set people up for like, great moments. So you can find, if you have those players, you can off to the side be like, hey, this session, I'm going to put a spotlight on so-and-so, and they're going to be in this situation. Do you think that if I put you there with them, that maybe you could, just try to give them good opportunities, and I think that's totally acceptable, because as a group, right, we all know our players too, so I'm sure they're gonna be, oh wow, yeah, that person's, oh yeah, I'll help them out.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Another thing to help with, I think, social interactions is how the player plays the character. I have one character she's a folk hero, but she's extremely like nervous. She doesn't like being in the spotlight. And I had a moment where they're like returning, and they happen to be carrying a dead body of someone that these NPCs know, and they turn to like like to the folk heroes like what happened? She's like just kind of like stammers. And I have another character. She's huge and boisterous. She just bursts in like in the most dramatic like sobbing way to like immediately like take attention off her because she's a terrible liar and all this, right? And it's like so like it helps like how they play their characters as well, setting up interactions like between them. Like it definitely works when those two are together for the boisterous one to like step up and come up with like something to say versus like the shy one.
Yeah.
Working off the player dynamics for sure, I think that, and the character dynamics definitely helps in situations like that.
And that builds bonds between the players and the party too.
Yeah, sometimes I don't think we do that enough, is make a point to remind the players, like as a group, like in game as players, I mean as characters, and then out obviously we're a group too, like we're a team as players. We talked a little bit about like prepping too much. We talked a little bit about prepping not enough. So we should probably talk about, where's the sweet spot? How did we find where a spot is right for each of us? But I think the intro to that would be, how do you prep? Like, what are the key points you start with? Like, clearly every session has a problem. Maybe it's ongoing from the last one, or it's new, right? But it has some kind of adversity. You probably have an idea of what kind of a problem it is. Like, is it social in nature because we're at a ball, or a privileged party of politicians, or if it's in a cave, or a monster lair. We have a better idea of what people brought with them to deal with it, so we probably know how that goes. But you know who your party is, other than you don't always know who's going to show up. So maybe like we take a minute to talk about what points are the most crucial to prep. So Cheyenne, you want to take that first?
Since my world is based off of individual fairy tales that they go through, their fairy tale characters themselves. It's like I pick the story like that I'm telling. Like, what is it? The fairy. They and I want to like lead them through like what that fairy tale is, but let them do it like as themselves. An old lady's asking like for some water, but the bucket's fallen into the well. Like, how are they gonna like go through that? I'm gonna turn into a giant snake, swim down there, and bring the bucket back. Or it's like, oh, never mind. I just have a water satchel. You can have that instead. Or just like trying to like prep for the ways that like they might like interact with these certain fairy tales. Are they going to want to like go through that or not? Like, how are they going to try and like change it? Like, will they accidentally like kill the bad guy before it happens or not? But
it's
like
very cool. You have like such a uniquely awesome situation where you have like a different way to prep because it's really guided by an abstract tool. Like, I have this fairy tale. This is the guideline of this fairy tale. So how does it implement into my game? And then maybe how are my players going to deal with it? That's kind of that's cool.
Exactly. Like, if they're rude to the fairy, they'll get cursed and be attacked by animals. If they're nice, she'll give them a boon or something, right?
Yeah.
Like just basing it on like the different folklore and fairy tales and like combining them together sometimes.
Kind of like grabbing off your favorite like sitcom, right? Like your favorite ongoing TV show like Supernatural or Buffy the Vampire Slayer. You're like, oh, I love the plot of this episode. Great, implemented in my next session. But fantasy skins.
Yes.
Callie, what about you?
I actually had this discussion last night after our game with one of my players. They were asking me how I expected them to react. And I was like, I have no expectations anymore. I can't, because I'm never close at all. And so I think what I've done, or how I've changed, because when I first started prepping as a DM, I would try to prep for different outcomes. And it just, like, I would maybe get it once a month, like maybe. And we played weekly, and it's like, yeah, this is a lot of work that's going to waste. And so what it has become is, instead of prepping outcomes, I I learn people's intentions. I learn what people are wanting in terms of my NPCs and my all the things that are happening behind the scenes that the characters aren't seeing, the people that they're involved with currently, the NPCs that they force me to make up on the fly, because it's a lot easier to react to the things that my players come up with that I would have never expected, because I'm not good at, like, if I am expecting one thing and you go a mile the other way, I'm sitting there going, whereas if I know what they want, if I know what this person or monster or whatever, what their goal is, then whatever my players do, it's easier to react. It's easier to adjust whatever I may have had planned. So it's more of a general idea to the goalpost than an actual path. Because I've just found that that's what works for me, because I'm not good at improvising.
No, I think that's wonderful advice, right? Because that lets you know too, like, well, if the players don't deal with, villain A is still doing this thing in the background. What, nobody cared about villain A for 3 days? Shit, villain A's got like the whole town in his pocket now, and then now when they go to, so it's nice because in some games, like the Apocalypse World games have clocks, and it's nice because when you have intentions, that's the basic idea, is that you're thinking about what everyone wants and kind of what they'll do to get it. So when those questions come up of like, well, whatever did happen to so-and-so that we were supposed to deal with, before we left on this adventure, oh, don't worry, you'll find out.
Yeah.
Right? It didn't pause like you left. Yeah.
So Jenna Sasquatch says, creative inspiration isn't prep per se, but watching particular shows or playing certain music or reading almost does more than writing notes. So getting in that headspace. What do you guys like to do? Like, day of game, you're going to be gaming in a little bit. How do you get in your headspace?
Definitely music. Like, helps, like certain, like, specific songs for the situations or the characters, like, get yourself pumped up. We all get together and we hang out like before, right? So like we're getting like together, getting like pumped for the game, and like talking about last game and whatnot, and yeah, getting together definitely helps.
I don't have that, unfortunately. We play online, but I don't really have a ritual. I will drink caffeine if I remember to make tea. I will read over my notes about an hour beforehand, try to remember what we did last time, what the players are supposed to be doing or wanting to do, start panicking because I feel like I'm not prepared. And once the heart rate starts going, it's like, yeah, let's go, let's do this. Which isn't good advice, but it works for me.
So speaking of the creativity, I'm trying to see. Was it Gina Sasquatch or Genesis Sasquatch? Oh, it's Gene Sasquatch. There you go. So you made a good point. I believe what you said, or at least I interpret it as like I feel better when I walk into a session and I have a lot of TV shows or podcasts or like books, like audiobooks, even in my head. I feel like it's easier for me when I'm like flooded with fiction. And it doesn't even have to be of the same, genre or specific situation. I'm definitely much better in that perspective than I would be if it was like all I did for a week was like, stuff that had no fiction to it. Like I was working and I was reading technical manuals and I was cooking and cleaning. But like when I have stories in my head of like betrayal and backstabbing and laughter and heartfelt tenderness and adventure and, friendship and all these things, like I feel like I just have a lot more connections in my brain that are just hanging out. So when stuff starts going, I can just flow easier. But and of course, like Callie said, you always like, if you have notes, like look at them again, like I usually like to look at my stuff a day before and then like just before. like, because sometimes I look at it and I go, oh yeah, because I did this 2 weeks ago, and then like and then right before I go to do it, I'm like, oh, because now I'm going to pick up some of the finer points, where the day before was just kind of refresher for me. Some games, I find myself more nervous a lot of times if the game doesn't have some kind of like character creation or something we do right off the bat. Like it's an ongoing campaign. Even my friends sometimes, like I do kind of have to get comfortable with the group again, because like otherwise sometimes we're like diving right back into like serious mode with NPCs and like voices and stuff. Like it can just be a little like, I don't know, I got nerves, right? So if I can get comfortable with everyone and set the mood, and then they're like, all right, ready, let's do this. But it's funny, I run a lot of convention games, and I don't have that problem there because it's like, I guess it's not an option, and it's the first session. So I think the first session we all kind of get acclimated together, but sometimes it's the jumping back in as the GM. Like, shit, how exactly? Somebody said earlier, like the voice. Like, how did I say that voice? Because now it sounds Irish, but it was Russian, and they had a knife, right? Was it a butcher knife? Because in my head, oh, it was a club. Like you just kind of have to get right back to where you were.
Yep. I've given up on consistency. It's not going to happen.
Let's see. So there were some more topics. Let's just touch a couple things real quick. So, the one thing I kind of wanted to mention, because I guess I said earlier, was like, have you two ever found yourself, I find myself more and more doing this, where I follow the dice to my peril. Like I'll be playing a game, I'll be running a game, and I run a lot of different games. So I read them, and as a game designer, I want to see them run how they were designed, because I'm trying to learn also from the design of like, okay, was this a good choice? Was this a bad choice? Did I like this? Do I want to steal this or change this, tweak this? And sometimes that leads me to run a game to its own demise. Like as a GM, I know like, okay, pacing, scheduling, player interest, feeding off of players. I can see that this is annoying because the partial success is getting really tedious because the adventure is in Africa, but we're in Massachusetts. And every time we try to find out the address and how to get there and book plane tickets, it's like partial success with the catch. Oh, you did it, but here's the problem. And what did that create? That created the first hour and a half where we're still in fucking Massachusetts because of plane problems, can't get everyone together, someone's rent's due, can't find the money, don't know where the address is. The game was this cool, like discovery mission in Africa, but we can't get there because the fucking game, So, do you two ever find yourself where like, when do you fudge? When do you say, all right, no more rolls because they have to pick this piece of paper?
If it would be really cool, I try to go by rule of cool. Like I had a moment where two characters, like they rolled for initiative, they got like exactly the same, so I'm like, then okay, you both are immediately like locked in, like without having to roll again, you two are like locked against each other or whatnot. Or like if I had a moment where I was failing to attack a player and they were failing to attack me, so instead they're just spitting insults at each other instead. If it would be cool, then like it's okay to fudge. There's like a moment, druids can't fly at a low level, but for some strange reason, my one druid, just in this moment, they can fly. Like in this like strange moment, and like later it's like, it's weird, magic is strange here or something. Yeah, you gotta like look at the situation and like sometimes, yeah, maybe you fudge a number like to let something happen, but definitely I try to go by rule of cool.
I don't know.
Alternatively,
I just wanted to throw that in there. Like a couple of my regrets, biggest regrets, are when I didn't do the rule of cool. Like I still kick myself every day when I think about like one time I let this person be in this tournament and he almost won. Why didn't I just let him win? He almost won. He was not supposed to beat the third, from the top fight. He beat that guy. He wasn't supposed to beat the second to the top guy. And then the top guy, I made him so incredibly difficult. There was no way he could beat him. He got a couple good hits in. And I'm like, so now what did that do? We ended the session where it was really cool and it was amazing and had this great wave up. And then, but the end of the story and the end of the night was like, yeah, but you just didn't pull it off. Like there wasn't some cool added story there, right? It was just like, well, that was a great, cool session of how you were in this tournament and you fought the best guy and you lost. Okay, next session we continue with the campaign. It's kind of like, I'll never forget that. And So sometimes we do that, like we just do that too. Sorry, Kelly, what were you thinking?
No, alternatively to the rule of cool is, in my opinion, not rolling for things that just can't be cool, or like the consequences of failure are just like irritation or delaying, or like, we're going to buy a plane ticket, like in your example. Okay, roll. Like, you're competent adults. Is there anything preventing you from doing this adequately? Okay, you don't have to roll. You buy the tickets. That's success. Hooray! It just does more to, if it does more to hinder the game than to progress it, you do it. It's a success. You don't have to roll, because, like you said, you end up in, you want to be on this grand adventure and you're stuck searching for your keys. Where did I leave my keys? So yeah, if it's
close to real life, right?
Yeah, it's too close to real life. We're not playing this game to be real life. We're escaping real life. This is escapism. I want to be cool.
And you know that very well, because like you said, you run 2-hour sessions, and like you can't fiddle with BS, and it can't be stalling. Anything stalling should be like fast forwarded, right?
Yeah. And there's been a few cases where my players are like, I want to do this. What do I roll? And I'm like, you just do it. You don't have to roll anything. Your character is trained in this. They can do it. They just do it. Like, it's not absurd. They're not like jumping over the moon. They're crossing a bridge. They can do this. It's fine.
So we're down to the last couple minutes. Any final thoughts? Anything that we didn't get out there, whether it's questions or Callie or Cheyenne? GM prep, your notes.
I think I think an actually good thing for like notes is like when the inspiration hits and you start writing it down, rewrite it afterwards, like with more specifics if you need to, because definitely helping rewrite the notes will definitely like help you understand like your thoughts. If it's just like flowing out like really quick or whatnot, rewriting it again will definitely help. I find that it helps me anyways.
Yeah, bullet point notes in the moment are great, but like a month later, it's like, well, what does this mean? I don't know what this is supposed to be.
Yeah, and I would just want to reiterate, one of the points earlier was like, you're a player too, like you're gonna prep, but you're human. Sometimes it's not gonna work. It's totally cool to reach out to your players. It's okay to admit that sometimes. You'd be like, hey, I really thought we were going in that cave, and we went back to town. So cool. Let's see what happens.
And it's okay to ask your players ahead of time, like, what do you guys want to do? What are you planning to do? Because it's more fun if you guys all discuss it and you actually have a full session of prepped material versus they throw you a curveball and there's nothing and you have to cut it short, or you play a half-assed something that you can pull from your head or that you have on hand. It's more fun for everybody if there's content. So, it's okay to talk about it. It doesn't have to be a surprise.
The players should know the goal, even if the characters don't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, we're just about out of time. Let's let everybody know where to find you and who you are.
So I already said I'm Pete Petrucia. You can find me at Ben Branner. It says it real nicely up on that screen. One of the cool things I just wanted to mention, other than I make games and stuff, is Gen Con's coming up. And Gen Con GMs, if you want a free badge for Gen Con, which is like $120 value, we only ask for like 8 hours of a commitment. So you can find that. You'll find more information throughout the month at the Indie Game Developer Network on Facebook or on Twitter, or you can find me and ask me. But I'll be posting stuff throughout the month of just trying to be like, here's all the games. If you run this game and this game, you get a free copy of each, and we give you a free badge. So all kinds of ways to save yourself some money, maybe even help you find hotel rooms and stuff if you need it. So.
I'm Callie. Online, you can find me AceNeFire. On Twitter, I'm at AppleXSauce. I DM our group, Riff and Rabble. We're at twitch.tv/Riff and Rabble. We try to stream every week on Saturday. life happens. We're on Twitter as well at Riff and Rabble.
Yeah, I'm Cheyenne. You can find me on Twitter at cars_Jans. And you can find our podcast, Chicks with Crits. I want to say the last part again. Crits. Yeah, on Twitter and anywhere you can find podcasts, on YouTube as well now.
It's really nice talking to you. This was the first time I met Cheyenne and Callie. You two are awesome.
Yeah, it was
Nice
great.
to talk to
Thank
you
you
as
very
well.
much.
Yeah, it's good to see you again, Callie.
All right.
Yes,
Well,
and you.
thank you, Pete, Callie, and Cheyenne for hosting this week. And thank you to Dusty Van City and Je ne sais Squatch, of course, came up with 2 gems of questions for us, so that was great. Also, the chat was super active tonight, so Gage got his supernatural in, and Young One was telling us about his home group, so that's always good stuff. And next week it's going to be Scrim, Chad, and Pedro, and we'll see you next week.
What a beautiful name.